Prologue. The Cargo. July 15, 1945, San Francisco Bay. The fog rolled in thick over the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard, clinging to the gray hull of the USS Indianapolis like a shroud. To the casual observer, she was just another Portland-class heavy cruiser, a warhorse that had seen the fire of the Pacific and lived to tell the tale. But today, the Indy was not just a ship. She was the most important vessel in the history of human warfare. Captain Charles B. McVay III stood on the bridge, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. At 46, McVay was a man of discipline and pedigree, his father an admiral before him. He had faced kamikazes at Okinawa, seen men die in the roar of battle, but nothing had unsettled him quite like the orders he had received just hours ago. "Speed is of the essence, Captain," the admiral had told him, his voice devoid of the usual camaraderie. "You are to transport a cargo to Tinian Island. You will not stop. You will not acknowledge radio silence, and under no circumstances are you to ask what is inside the crate." The crate. It was roughly the size of a grand piano, bolted to the deck in the hangar usually reserved for observation planes. Two Army officers, grim-faced and armed with sidearms, stood guard over it 24 hours a day. They didn't speak to the sailors. They didn't sleep. Below decks, in the officers' quarters, lay a smaller canister, a lead-lined bucket welded to the floor. McVay didn't know the specifics, but he was a smart man. He knew the rumors of a super weapon. He knew the Manhattan Project was more than just whispers. Inside that crate and that canister were the components for Little Boy, the atomic bomb that would soon incinerate the city of Hiroshima. The Indianapolis was carrying the end of the world. "Cast off all lines," McVay ordered, his voice steady. As the massive cruiser pulled away from the dock, cutting through the cold Pacific waters, the 1,195 men on board had no idea they were sailing into a nightmare that would eclipse the horrors of battle. They were young, most just teenagers from the cornfields of Iowa or the streets of Brooklyn, dreaming of the end of the war, of girls back home, of ice cream. They were making record speed. They were unstoppable. They were alone. Chapter 1. The Strike. July 30, 1945, the Philippine Sea, 0014 hours, midnight. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. The Philippine Sea was a sheet of black glass, undulating slowly in the oppressive heat of the tropical night. The USS Indianapolis was alone. Having successfully delivered the bomb components to Tinian Island, the ship was now en route to Leyte in the Philippines to prepare for the invasion of Japan. Because of a bureaucratic oversight and a fatal underestimation of the enemy, the Indy had been denied a destroyer escort. The Navy command believed the waters were safe. They were wrong. Beneath the surface, submerged in the silent darkness, lay the I-58, a Japanese B-3 submarine commanded by Lieutenant Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto. Hashimoto peered through his periscope, his breath shallow. The silhouette of the American cruiser was etched against the faint horizon. It wasn't zigzagging, a defensive maneuver used to dodge torpedoes. It was sailing in a straight line. Target bearing red 90, range 1,500 meters. He couldn't believe his luck. The war was turning against Japan. His homeland was burning. But here, in the dark, he had one last chance to strike a blow for the Emperor. Fire tubes 1 through 6. A series of hisses cut through the submarine as the Type 95 torpedoes, the long lances, sped away from the sub, leaving a trail of bubbles in their wake. 0015 hours. On the Indy, Seaman First Class Loyal Dean Cox was trying to sleep on the open deck. The heat below was unbearable. The gentle hum of the engines was a lullaby he had grown used to. Then the world ended. Boom! The first torpedo struck the starboard bow. It didn't just hit, it obliterated the front 40 feet of the ship. The sound was not a bang, but a physical punch that lifted the 10,000-ton vessel out of the water. Aviation fuel ignited instantly, sending a column of fire hundreds of feet into the night sky. Before the men could even scream, the second torpedo hit. Crack. This one was the killer. It struck mid-ship, directly beneath the fuel bunkers and powder magazines. The explosion tore the ship in half. Inside the hull, the lights flickered and died. The screams of men were instantly silenced by rushing water and exploding steel. The cafeteria, where the night watch was getting coffee, was vaporized. Captain McVeigh was thrown from his bunk. The air was filled with acrid smoke and the smell of cordite. He scrambled to his feet, blindly reaching for his uniform in the dark. "Damage report," he yelled, stumbling onto the bridge. The executive officer, Commander Flynn, was already there, his face illuminated by the fires raging below. "We're finished, Captain. The bow is gone. We are listing fast." McVeigh looked out at his ship. It was a scene from hell. Men were jumping from the railings, engulfed in flames. The ship was groaning, a terrible metallic shriek as the bulkheads collapsed. She was tilting to the right. 10 degrees, then 20, then 40. "Abandon ship," McVeigh ordered. "Pass the word. Abandon ship." But the PA system was dead. The radios were dead. The SOS signals they tried to tap out were frantic, jagged bursts of energy that might never be heard. It took only 12 minutes. 12 minutes for a majestic heavy cruiser to become a tomb. As the stern rose into the air, the propeller spinning uselessly against the night sky, the ship began its final plunge. Hundreds of men were trapped inside, dragged down into the crushing depths. Those who made it into the water, about 900 men, gasped for air, choking on fuel oil that coated the surface of the ocean in a thick, toxic black sludge. They were alive. They had survived the explosion. They bobbed in the water, clinging to life jackets, debris, and each other. "The Navy will be here in the morning," a young sailor sputtered, wiping oil from his eyes. "They know we're missing. They'll send planes." But the Navy didn't know. Due to a misunderstanding of the distress protocols, the Indianapolis was not marked as overdue. No one was looking for them. And as the fires of the sinking ship extinguished, plunging the ocean back into total darkness, the men of the Indianapolis realized something terrifying. The water below them was not empty. Chapter 2. The First Morning. July 30, 1945, sunrise. The sun rose with a cruel beauty. The sky turned a brilliant pink and orange, casting a light on the disaster. The ocean was covered in a slick of black oil. In the center of the debris field, roughly 900 men drifted in groups. Some were injured, their skin burned by the explosion. Others were naked, having been blown out of their bunks. The groups were separated. There was the swimmers' group, mostly strong young men with no rafts. There were the wounded, clustered around the few cork life nets, floater nets that had floated free. And far away, alone on a piece of wreckage, was Captain McVeigh. Discipline held at first. Officers barked orders. "Lock arms, stay together. Check your buddy, keep his head up." Dr. Lewis Haynes, the ship's chief medical officer, moved among the men. He was a beacon of calm in a sea of panic. He paddled from man to man, checking pulses, offering words of comfort. He knew the situation was dire. The oil was getting into their eyes, blinding them. It was getting into their stomachs, making them vomit, which only dehydrated them faster. "Don't drink the water," Haynes repeated, his voice raspy. "Whatever you do, don't drink the seawater. It will kill you." But the thirst was already starting. The tropical sun hammered down on them,
reflecting off the oil in the water, baking their exposed skin. By noon, the ocean was calm. Too calm. Seaman Cox, floating in a large group, felt something brush against his leg. He froze. "Did you feel that?" he whispered to the sailor next to him. "Feel what? Debris?" "No," Cox said, his heart hammering against his ribs. A few yards away, a dorsal fin broke the surface. It was gray, triangular, and moved with a terrifying, silent purpose. Then another. Then another. Oceanic white-tip sharks. They are considered the most dangerous sharks to shipwreck survivors. They are opportunistic hunters, drawn by the sound of the explosion and the scent of blood in the water. A scream pierced the air. Sudden,
sharp, cut off abruptly. The men spun around in the water, splashing frantically. A sailor on the edge of the group had vanished. A cloud of red bloomed in the black water. "Shark!" The cry went up, a primal sound of terror. "Bunch up!" an officer screamed. "Kick your legs! Make noise! Scare them off!" The men huddled together, kicking and screaming, turning the water into a frothing, chaotic mess. The sharks retreated, circling just out of sight in the deep blue gloom. But they didn't leave. They waited. As the sun began to set on the first day, the men realized the sharks were not hunting aggressively yet. They were testing. They were picking off the stragglers, the dead, and the isolated. Night fell again. The temperature dropped. The men, shivering in the water, listened to the sounds of splashing in the dark, followed by screams that echoed across the empty ocean. They were 900 men floating in the middle of nowhere, and they were being hunted. Chapter 3. Madness in the Deep. August 1, 1945, Day 3. The third day was when the hallucinations began. For 72 hours, the men had been floating in salt water. Their life jackets were becoming waterlogged, dragging them down. Their skin was covered in salt sores. Their lips were cracked and bleeding. But the worst enemy was not the sharks. It was the mind. Dehydration causes the brain to misfire. It creates vivid, terrifyingly real hallucinations. "I see the island!" a sailor shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the empty horizon. "Look, there's a hotel. They have ice water." "Sit down, sailor. There's nothing there," Dr. Haynes said weakly, holding on to a net. "No, I see it. My mom is there. She's cooking." The sailor unhooked himself from the group and began to swim away, toward the nothingness. "Come back!" Haynes yelled, but he had no energy to chase him. The men watched as the sailor swam about 50 yards. Then the water around him churned. A massive gray shape rose from the depths. The sailor didn't even scream as he was pulled under. But the madness spread like a contagion. Some men became paranoid. They believed the Japanese had infiltrated their group. "He's a Jap," one man screamed, grabbing the throat of his friend. "He's trying to drown me." Fights broke out in the water. Men who had served together for years, who were best friends, began to beat each other with their last ounces of strength. In the chaos, the sharks moved in, snatching the distracted and the weak. Dr. Haynes spent the day holding men as they died. He would take their dog tags, say a prayer, and then release their bodies into the deep. He watched as the bodies sank, only to be intercepted by the sharks circling below. "Captain," a young boy whispered to Haynes. He was delirious, his eyes burnt shut by the sun. "Is the ship coming back?" "Yes, son," Haynes lied, tears mixing with the salt water on his face. "It's coming soon. Just hold on." By the end of Day 3, the 900 survivors had dwindled. Hundreds had died from wounds, dehydration, or the jaws of the predators. Captain McVeigh, floating alone on his raft miles away from the main group, watched the horizon. He had his service pistol. He checked the rounds. He thought about ending it. The guilt was a heavy stone in his chest. "My ship," he thought. "My men."
But he put the gun away. No, he told himself, I have to tell their story. I have to explain why no one came. Chapter 4, The Angel in the Sky. August 2, 1945, Day 4. Lieutenant Chuck Gwynn was flying a PV-1 Ventura bomber on a routine anti-submarine patrol. He was bored. The war was almost over, and he was staring at the endless blue ocean, looking for a periscope that probably wasn't there. He had a faulty antenna wire that was dangling from the tail of his plane. He went back to the rear of the aircraft to reel it in. As he looked down through the open hatch, he saw something odd. An oil slick. Probably a Jap sub vented its tanks, he thought. He decided to drop down for a closer look, preparing to drop a depth charge. He descended to 1,000 feet. Then he saw them. Hundreds of black dots bobbing in the oil. My God, Gwynn breathed into his headset. Those are heads. Those are men. He immediately radioed his base. Sighted many men in water. Position, urgent. The Navy didn't believe him at first. No ships are reported missing in that area, the reply came. I don't care what your report says, Gwynn yelled. I see hundreds of men. They are being attacked by sharks. Send help now. Gwynn stayed over the site, dropping life rafts and supplies, but he watched helplessly as sharks continued to attack. Hours later, a PBY Catalina seaplane, piloted by Lieutenant Adrian Marks, arrived. Marks saw the horror below. He saw men being ripped apart. Against standing orders, which forbade landing in open ocean swells, Marks made a decision. I'm going down, he told his crew. Lieutenant, the waves are 12 feet high. You'll tear the plane apart. I am not watching these men die. Marks brought the clumsy seaplane down. The hull groaned, rivets popped, but he stuck the landing. He taxied his plane into the middle of the survivors. Men, weeping with relief, used their last strength to crawl onto the wings of the plane. They filled the fuselage. They filled the wings. Marks loaded 56 men onto his plane, turning it into a floating life raft. As night fell, the USS Cecil J. Doyle, the first rescue ship, finally arrived. The captain turned on his searchlights, beaming a pillar of light into the sky, a beacon of hope, risking Japanese attack to tell the survivors, "We are here." Epilogue of Part 1, The Count. Of the 1,195 men who sailed on the USS Indianapolis, only 316 survived. 809 men were lost. It remains the greatest single loss of life at sea in the history of the U.S. Navy. They had delivered the bomb that ended the war, but the war had consumed them in its final days. Captain McVeigh survived, but his ordeal was not over. The Navy, looking for a scapegoat to cover up their own incompetence in failing to track the ship, would court-martial him. He would be the only captain in World War II to be court-martialed for losing his ship to an act of war. But that is a story for the next chapter.